means you're not going to let us have any cupcakes? There's got cupcakes in your next one back. Back with a cupcake.
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, we'll go ahead and call the, you guys ready? Okay, we'll go ahead and call, what is that? Okay, we'll go ahead and call the November 14th meeting of the Los Osos Basin Management Committee meeting to order. Can we please rise? Do we have a flag anywhere?
I don't see one, sir. Within that, imagine it.
Imaginary flag over there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Rob, could you please roll call, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Zimmer?
Here.
Director Cody?
Here.
Director Gibson?
Here.
And Chairperson Ohilsky?
Present. For the record, are you now the member or are you still the alternate?
I'm the member.
Okay, just for the record. Okay, so we have board member comments. We'll start with Mr. Zimmer.
Just have a brief comment on our pumping strategy. We've talked a lot about the nitrate removal system for our Skyline well and then our recent Los Olivos 5 well. So we continue to pump upper aquifer water through the ion exchange. We're adjusting our pumping and moving some additional pumping away from Rosina to our Los Olivos 5 well. So I think we see some difference in as we go through some of this data, you might see some of those differences in our pumping strategy. So want to give everybody an update, let you know that those two are working good, everything's up and running, and we continue to pump in that way.
Okay, great. Anything? Bruce?
No.
I have nothing. Okay, we have a consent agenda then. Next item on the agenda. There's two items on the consent agenda. One is the approval of the minutes from the August 30th, 2018 meeting and approval of the warrants budget update and invoice register through October 2018. Do we have any questions before we go to public comment? Mark? No?
There's a couple typos on the minutes. We can do that either after
Let's
or...
do
Sure,
that.
if they're minor, just give them to me.
they're minor. I can give them to you.
Great.
Okay, so Bruce, do you have anything?
No.
Okay, public comment on the consent agenda, which is the approval of the minutes and the approval of the warrants budget update and the invoice register. Any comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comments, and unless you want to go through if those are just minor edits, I guess you can just communicate directly to Rob, otherwise...
Yeah, they're just minor typo, no change in content.
Okay. All right, can we have a motion then to approve, please?
I'll make a motion. Second. Sorry, I made the motion to approve.
Okay. Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, passes unanimously. Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Executive Director's report's in written form and published on the web for anyone who's interested, but I did want to briefly walk through the content of the report. First, starting with the funding support program. So similar to last time, just acknowledging that seawater intrusion and the drilling of new wells to mitigate it continues to be a difficult funding angle for us under the latest programs, but we are continuing to watch. We do have a couple of projects that look relatively promising for funding. One is that the Los Osos CSD continues to pursue funds for the equipping of its 8th Street well, its upper aquifer well that was previously drilled and cased. And that funding is pending. And we'll give you an update at each meeting, but it looks like we are in a good position to receive at least some significant matching funds there for the equipping of that well. You will see under item 7D some discussion of proposed funding in 2019 for things like the creek discharge concept and some of the stormwater recovery concepts, at least seed funding for those programs. But we do continue to pursue IRWM or stormwater resource funds for those projects. I gave you a link to the latest county stormwater resource plan, so those who are interested can look at that. It's quite broad, but Los Osos gets some pretty good honorable mention, including the project that we're looking at to recover both storm and perched water at 8th and El Moro. So you'll see the link there. Still the same status on any zone of benefit analysis. We can reactivate that process as requested. And then the county staff were able to provide a brief update on the basin boundary modification request and SGMA. And you'll see some key dates there on the second page, including the closing of the public comment period. And we are expecting, and maybe there's an update from staff, whether DWR has released any draft information yet. Feel free to come to the podium if you have anything new from DWR. Just quiet and crickets. Okay, we'll bring that back. And you'll see the rest of the dates there as to how that boundary modification should unfold in time. There's also an update on the Los Osos wastewater project as they make the last few connections, and there is a number of properties that are going to be subject to some enforcement if they don't connect, and the tallies are provided there. I did want to note that in terms of effluent disposal, all the water continues to go to percolation disposal, both to Broderson and to Bay Ridge, though it's my understanding that the Board of Supervisors will be considering final recycled water agreements here shortly, possibly in December, that those agreements have finally come to fruition, and we do expect those to come to a public hearing at the county level shortly. And county staff can feel free to give more light to that if they would like. Water conservation rebate activity continues to be quite light, with only one washer rebate over the last reporting period. So one of the items on our 2019 draft work plan is to find ways to goad that process forward and to remind people there's still plenty of water to be saved through more efficient fixtures in the community. Continue to just keep Morro Bay on the radar screen. On my executive director's report, we had reached out to them, and I know that they're in a study phase on their overall water management concepts, but we acknowledge that we're their close neighbor, and if there is future projects where we can work together, we'll bring those before this committee in their inception. And then finally, I did want to provide I guess a snapshot or an update as to the fall water quality information. For those of you in the audience who may not know, twice a year we look at the mineral quality and the water levels in all our deep wells to try to keep close tabs on seawater intrusion. We do that in the spring and in the fall, and that gets reported out annually as part of our annual report. So this won't be officially published until next year, but I do like to bring an update. So the news is good. We were a little nervous on this one because rainfall last year was not impressive. We did have some late rains, but January and February were pretty dismal, if you recall. And we continued to see water levels rising, and we continue to see chlorides dropping. One of the particularly encouraging data points for staff is the one monitoring well that had given us some pause. It's a Zone E monitoring well that we call LA11, and you'll see that. I'll scroll down here if it will respond to me. There we go. It's a little hard to see it at that scale. but a monitoring well down near the bay that has historically, even in years where we've had the chloride metric drop, has had some concerns, and it did drop this year down at the lowest level we've seen in a number of years, and so we hope to continue to see that trend, as well as some of the district's wells, 8th and 10th Street, showed some pretty promising declines. So in summary, we're definitely seeing a trend, and it's an expected trend, but it's a trend nonetheless. We should continue to see water levels recover, assuming we continue to get rainfall. So obviously it's not been a good start to this year, but there might be a change in the weather pattern next week is what I hear. So generally promising signs. We need to keep very vigilant. These can reverse quickly if we have a dry year or if pumping increases due to rebound in customer demand. So we need to continue the conservation and continue our prudent pumping regimes. Mr. Chair, I believe that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Okay. Well, go to public comment on the report here. Okay. So we'll move on, Rob. So we're action items number 7A, the update on the status of the Basin Plan infrastructure projects.
Yes, and I'll just get a grab.
Recommendation is to receive and provide input.
Right. I'll just put my chart up here. So this is a standing item for the committee to provide an update on our various capital improvement projects, and I'll go through each project one at a time as we discuss it here for the benefit of the public listening in. The district's 8th Street Upper Aquifer Well is a Program A project, again previously drilled and cased over a year ago, and the district is currently looking for a matching grant for that project, and we're looking for the availability of those grants. We did rank very highly for the project, but they tell us it will be available in 2019, but we don't have a hard and fast date yet. The plans and specs are 100% complete, and that project is ready to go out to bid as soon as we have certainty on the grant. So it's shovel ready. All the environmental documents are in place, and once started, it'll be a pretty quick construction process. For some of the other projects that we had previously given status updates on, we've now just pushed those over to the completed column. I think that was a comment last time from Director Zimmer. Well taken. Although we do continue to list a community nitrate removal facility under Program B as being partially complete or complete in a phased mode because of Golden State's Program A project. So the most significant update in terms of well drilling and development is what we're calling expansion well number 2, and this will also come up in a later agenda item when we talk about Cleith's report on metric trends. But we are continuing to pursue a well site, as you've heard in some of the previous discussions. There was a community workshop held on August 30th. It was very well attended, and the community continues to express quite a lot of concern over the location of this well. If you remember, there are 4 sites that are being reviewed, and all of them are controversial in some manner. There is one site at the Los Osos Middle School in the roadway fronting the middle school playfields that appears to be perhaps less controversial than the others. And at their last meeting, the Los Osos CSD authorized the drilling of, at least the preparation of bid documents for the drilling of a test well at that site. And what that would involve would be the sinking of a test hole, 5-inch casing, pump tests, aquifer properties, and then the projection of how much water may be available at that site in order to determine if it's even a viable site in terms of the water quantity available and what its impact on surrounding wells might be. So again, that's just a test phase. No permanent well is currently proposed at that site. And so that was approved in the November 1st meeting, and we'll bring back updates at our meetings as to the status of that test well. So as to the other Program C projects, those are deferred as recommended in previous reports, and we'll be discussing that under item 7B today. A brief update into our Requested by the Sea monitoring well. A wetlands delineation was completed in the summer, and a minor use permit application was submitted to the county. We're hoping to go to hearing as soon as possible. I attended a LOCAC planning meeting last week, and they approved it or recommended approval to the full LOCAC committee without significant comment, and we do expect LOCAC to support that on their next consent agenda. So as soon as we have a minor use permit hearing date, we'll report that back out to the committee. Certainly hope to drill that well in 2019 to get that data point and fill in the gap. We have, at the request of the committee, added another program, Program U, which, if you remember the alphabet soup in the Basin Management Plan, was the Urban Water Reinvestment Program. And we'll start to track projects that are of committee interest. And the Creek Discharge Program has been added. And we've reminded folks that to get through the feasibility phase, we're looking at a budget of nearly $600,000. Though in the work plan that's on our agenda for item 7D, we recommend a budget allocation for next year just for discussion, early discussion. But we've added that Creek Discharge Program to the formal infrastructure status update. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Rob, I'd just like to discuss something with you.
Sure.
So I know there's people here to talk about the East Side well, the Program B, but I don't know if we should talk about it under this item or under the next item, because it seems to me there's some background information in the Cleith Harris report that we might want to put out on the table before we talk about that. So
that's not a bad idea, Mr. Chair. So yeah, if you're here to speak about that East Side Program C well, perhaps the agenda item which comes right after this one, 7B,
right,
where we talk about the Cleith study, you might get a little more background. Of course, they're free to talk about it here, but
I'm
maybe
just
a little more
thinking
germane
because
to the
it does
next one.
it does get into more detail about it, and I know some people, if you want to talk about it, if we're going to talk about it under this item, we're not prepared to talk about the Cleith Harris report, so there's kind of a chasm there, for lack of a better term. So I think if you want to talk about the Program C, the East Side well, I'd prefer that you wait till Rob gives his update on the Cleith Harris report.
Very good.
Because I think it will make more sense then, because you'll have the metric trends before you and you'll be able to talk about those rather than asking questions that will be covered in the next item.
Agreed.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so we'll go to public comment then on the update. Again, I'd prefer that if you want to talk about the East Side wells, we save that till the next item, but you're free to do that.
Good afternoon, Lindy. Oh, and I wondered if we could get a description of the creek discharge program. I think the public would be educated better about it, too. And was that 700,000? 8? You'll tell me. Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Oh, I'm glad everybody's deferring till the next item. Okay, we'll close public comment on this, and Rob, if you could answer those questions, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So the concept for the Creek Discharge Program was to take highly treated recycled water and to introduce it south of Los Osos Valley Road in Los Osos Creek, where the creek sediments are quite permeable and there's communication with our lower aquifer at that location. And we would do that to provide more water in the lower aquifer and to boost the overall yield of the groundwater basin. We did have a previous study that was performed by a consultant to look at the cost of nailing down the feasibility and the regulatory environment for that creek discharge project. It's a significant effort in terms of monitoring for the baseline, dealing with the constituents in the water and the additional treatment that will be required to pull it off. And the first steps on that to achieve a firm feasibility had a price tag of about $600,000. In our previous meetings, which are published online, have that report included. And for those of you who can't find it, feel free to contact me, and I'll make sure it gets in your hands. But that will be also discussed under our 2019 work program. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to item 7B. And again, I appreciate everybody making sure that we could address these issues after we had all the background information out there. So this is the discussion of the Cleese-Harris report on Los Osos Basin Plan Metric Trends Review and Infrastructure Program C evaluation.
Thanks, sir. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here just in case folks decide that a map would be helpful. So this is actually a report that was previously released in draft form, and staff's not in a hurry to get it adopted. If you're prepared to do that today, of course, we'd be happy to do that, though it's a critical report, and we want to take the time that we need to discuss the conclusions in the report and make sure the wording is appropriate, because the content of this report will likely be incorporated into our next annual report. That's the sort of schedule we're looking at. So come next March, we should have a pretty good idea which of the principles and concepts in this report will be formally adopting as a committee. So for the benefit of the public, I'll just go back through some of the conclusions in the report. Really the mandate that we gave to the consultant was to look at the infrastructure that we've put in place to date or are about to put in place, look at the water demands in the basin and the amount of extractions and all the trends and the metrics that we've seen to date, and come up with some conclusions as to what portions of our infrastructure program need to happen immediately, which portions can possibly be deferred. And so it's a very important document from that perspective. And I'll flip to some of the conclusions. This is primarily focused on our Program C, which is the drilling of a new one or more lower aquifer wells on the east side of South Bay Boulevard, but to the west of Los Osos Creek. And so the report concluded that two things. One, it concluded that the basin metrics that are proposed in the basin plan could be met with the one Program C well that's already been drilled. That's the expansion well number 1, which was previously drilled and commissioned by Golden State Water Company. However, that is based on some very key underlying assumptions, including that we'll get an average of 17.5 inches of annual rainfall. So the report goes on to provide a recommendation that we do proceed with one additional Program C lower aquifer well, and it did that based on 3 basic ideas. The first is the reliability of our water system, knowing that we have a limited number of assets and not a lot of redundancy in those assets within the community. The report acknowledges that as we perhaps at any day could lose in the middle of the summer one of our key wells and it could be out of service for some period of time, it's more prudent to have redundant resources so that we're not forced to turn on some of the westerly wells like the district's Palisade well across the street here or Golden State's Resina well. So additional redundancy will provide a reliable summer period pumping regime that's protective of the basin. So that was the first point that supported drilling one more lower aquifer well. The second was drought. We know that from 2012 to 2016 we had an exceptional drought, one of the worst on record, and that in the current climate change regime there could be future droughts that could be protracted. And the thought is, depending on 17.5 inches of average rainfall, may not be the most prudent and conservative approach. but drilling another asset that could allow for reduced rainfall would be a smart thing to do for the community. And so drought impacts were a major reason to proceed with one additional lower aquifer well. And then the manner in which we distribute our recycled water was talked about, particularly how we leverage the use of recycled water with increasing the yield in the basin. We know that as we have good solid pumping resources on the east side, we can do a better job leveraging that reinvested water and getting the best bang for the buck as we percolate back to groundwater our recycled water. So those were the three key reasons that Cleith Harris provided for drilling one additional lower aquifer well. They also looked at different combinations of wells and how that would benefit the yield of the basin depending on where we drilled. And you'll see that in a helpful table summarized. Now, we don't know that for certain until we drill this test well over at the Los Osos Middle School. That will provide another key data point in this process. In terms of comment received to date, there's been some comments received, both from the public and a little bit from the committee. One of the things that we changed in this draft that wasn't in the first draft is the way that we denoted or designated these wells. If you read the first draft, it can get confusing, although it was technically correct. Cleith had attempted to use the same numbering sequence in the wells as they did in the basin plan, and it got a little unwieldy as you were reading it because you got confused as to whether you were talking about the order that they were being drilled in time or the geography in space. And so we've clarified that in this redraft, and we've named these different wells based on their location, not necessarily the order in which they're being drilled. So I think that was a helpful update to the report. At the Los Osos CSD level, this has been a discussion topic from the Utilities Advisory Committee, and there's even a draft letter that's in circulation that has not been adopted by the full board. So it's not an official communication of the CSD, but some of the comments in that letter include recommendation to strengthen the section that talks about the need to drill one additional well, and they have some comments as to how they think that should be done. But again, that's not gone before the full LOCSD board, and when it does, that will be provided formally here to the committee. And that is the context, and be happy to answer any questions if I can get my voice back.
Thank you. Do we have some questions?
Do I get to go first?
Yes.
All right, good.
You always get to go first.
All right. So, regarding the Program C well, what we talked about earlier in our earlier discussion is that it would be a monitoring well. And I just wasn't clear on how that was determined. We didn't talk about why that was shifted to a monitoring well. And my question evolves around the fact that, the basin information and the studies that we have, is there not enough information to be a little more certain that, we would be drilling a more permanent well there? It just seems like in some of the experiences with Golden State's well drilling efforts that we would move directly into drilling that permanent well. We wouldn't pull off and have that just be a monitoring well. So that was just more of a balance of resources. And I thought that, just really wasn't clear on if we have enough information in that portion of the basin, and that's why that was determined to move in that direction. The renaming of the wells, that's a great solution because, I know in some of our discussions we've gotten a little confused ourselves. So I support that. I think that's great information to have there. And then I even draw deeper into the well and how we're moving through it. And, I do appreciate the districts taking the initiative on this well and moving forward and securing funding. And, the basin plan lists that it's a joint effort, and so I just not sure if we're shifting more towards this being since it's going to be outside of Golden State service area, would this well be more in line with being a district well at the end of the process? I know when we originally, early on, the concept was that we would drill it in Golden State's area. We would use Golden State's system to convey the water. All of those would go away if it was drilled in the school's property. So just a little clarity on how we're moving through this as a joint effort, or is it perceived to be more of a district effort? And then if it is a joint effort, how do we, as the Basin Management Committee, fit into that role? And I know the district's taking the lead, and I appreciate that, so I'm not trying to say that, but I think, having a little more forefront from the Basin Management Committee, and then, some of the resources of Golden State to assist with that effort. I don't know if that would be helpful to have that during that process. So that was my main comment on that.
And I'd like to answer for the CSD. All we're proposing to do right now is to get proposals.
Right.
That's all. Because it's a step-by-step process. So all we did was authorize Rob to go out and get a proposal for the drilling of the well.
Right.
It's not the drilling of the well at all. But my understanding, and you can talk a little bit more about this, Rob, was because of the uncertainty about the yields of that well. That was the reason that we were going down this route.
Right. It was primarily looking at the capacity available at that location. We don't have enough information to conclude that a full-scale well would even be worth it. We do know that location's preferable from a community acceptance perspective, perhaps, and all the other sites are potentially highly controversial. So the board really wanted to see definitive information to answer that question, as opposed to going directly to the full-scale well. And we would, if it penciled out and it is a good location, then we would have the public discussion as to what it means to drill a full-scale well at that location, do environmental review and all that associated with that. But now we just don't feel like we have enough aquifer information to even consider that site. And so we're looking to clarify that. As to the funding of the well, I suppose it was the district's acknowledgement of Golden State's efforts to fund its expansion well, in taking our fair share of the burden there to fund at least the first steps in this well. And depending on its location, certainly the regional intertie would be available to move water around if that was prudent for the basin. And no final arrangements really in our minds at this point, other than we want to take careful steps to move it forward, trying to keep the public informed, because there's a lot of interest in what's happening with this well.
Right. Yeah. And I appreciate those comments, because the information that we talk about and have before us today is just the beginning of the trail. So I don't want to start down a trail without fully understanding what those commitments are, and really trying to provide assistance and resource there as we move through that. So like I said, I do appreciate the district taking that lead. Just want to make sure I understand what Basin Management Committee obligation, Golden State's obligation, so we can prepare and plan for that.
Yeah. We're just taking the lead on the $9,500 here. Again, I think Rob made it pretty clear. I mean, this is a step-by-step and an incremental process, but the district felt that it was important to see whether this well was even viable or not, and that's why we're going down this approach. So we would talk about the intertie distribution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, if we found out this well was viable. If it's not viable, then we're back to square one, I guess is the best way to put it. So.
Right. And if at the end of the day we end up with a monitoring well, is that helpful information? I know we approved the other monitoring well where we had a big gap in information. Do we have similar need for this monitoring well?
Not as critical. I mean, we love having monitoring wells, but it's not as critical as Cuesta by the Sea, certainly.
Okay.
All data are good data, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so it's my understanding, coming out of a program of the BMC, all these resources, wells, interties, are to be managed in a cooperative manner to provide for water for this community and to do right by the basin. So it makes sense to me in reading from the outside. I say Golden State has done its thing, and now the CSD is catching up on their side.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you look at the chart in there, it talks about cooperative funding for this. So, and you guys are out in the lead on us, so we owe you some money, for lack of a better term.
We're not keeping track.
But, so it's a cooperative funding effort.
Yeah.
So we just want to see if this is even a viable option, because when we had the workshop, it seemed like that, of all of the 4 potential locations, this was the one that had the biggest concerns about its viability and be able to provide the actual amount of water that would be required. So whether that's available or not is really the process we're going through here again. And my board just authorized the proposal stage at this point. But so it's an incremental process, as you said. So
Right. I just want to make sure that I can be prepared on my end.
when I give you a big bill,
Yeah, exactly.
no, we'll bring that back. It was just to keep this thing moving along. So
Okay, thank you.
thank you. You have anything?
Yeah.
Microphone, please.
I have a tremendous amount of comments on this document, and if we're not going to accept this time, then I can let a lot of them go and just talk to staff about this offline.
I don't envision us approving this today, so you may want to just forward those comments to him in writing, and then when we, if there's something you feel like we need to discuss, then bring it up. But otherwise, I think you just forward those on to Rob, and then when we bring it back for adoption, then we can talk in more detail.
Okay. I do have a couple of comments that maybe we should discuss as a committee. One of them is on page 5, PDF 41 of the report, second paragraph. I'm still having a little bit of an issue here with this second paragraph talking about possible problems with chloride metric data from one of these wells, that there's possibly communication between upper aquifer and lower aquifer water in this one location. And this sounds important to me, and maybe, I don't know if the committee should talk about funding a study, a special study for this, but this is fundamental to what we're doing here. And we don't have, for chloride metric monitoring, this sounds very important for us. So in addition to that, there's another discussion a few pages up talking about the sand spit wells, some issues measuring density, and Spencer's suggesting that we get a surveyor out, and this is page 4, PDF 39. And I wonder if we should also discuss, do we need to fund a study to take a look at those sand spit wells and the density problems there, and the possibly surveying, or is that part of a normal budget year? Let's see.
I think when we talk about work program, we may want to bring that discussion up, because that's a later agenda item.
I think so too, and those are not huge ticket items either. I think, Director Cody, those are probably worth talking about for 2019, because we already have some well surveying proposed next year. And of course, access to the sand spit's a little more challenging by kayak or whatever, but it can be done. And as to the chemistry of that potential well bore leakage, perhaps there's some more signatures we can get analytically that we haven't obtained yet, so we can think if there's a way to do that cost effectively. Those are good comments.
And there's also, down a little bit below that, the leaking well issue and the possible corruption of that chloride metric. On that same page, page 5, 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs down, there's a mention that the nitrate levels observed in a 30-day period average in September were 2 parts per million, and that's very low, and that's good news. It's interesting that the wastewater treatment plant permit allows much higher nitrate than that, and so I just want that said out loud, that's a very good news that we got, that the effluent, the recycled water is only 2 part per million right now.
It's hard to do. 2
Yeah.
is hard to do, and we're doing it, so, yeah.
But also, we should understand that recycled water is allowed to be much higher than that.
7, yeah.
Yes, 7 with peaks at 10.
Right.
Okay.
Very good.
Let's see. I guess I have a bunch of comments. I'll take those off, and we'll talk about the nitrate thing later, since we're not going to try to approve this. Now, the drought impacts. Thanks for mentioning the drought impacts and how important those are. And I think that's really all I have, and I'll take the rest. I'll take the rest offline. It's a great detailed report, and it's a big read. I encourage anybody with a little 10 hours of spare time to take a look at that report.
Mm-hmm. Does that take into account the napping time during the reading of it? Okay, is anything else? Okay, we'll close, we'll open public comment. So we're talking about now the Cleet Harris report on the Los Osos Basin Plan Metric Trends Review and Infrastructure Program C evaluation. So.
I have a simple question. Gary Walker, I live in Los Osos. I have 2 concerns. One is when a chairman says it's incremental the 4th or 5th time, I think you're right about a trail, that we get sometimes committed in those increments. The question I have is the 2 costs estimated of a monitoring well and a full-time production well. I mean, is there a huge savings by, So, you talked about them, but I couldn't understand the merit of each of those. Would you help me with that?
Yeah. Rob will answer the questions at the end. Yeah, Chuck.
Good afternoon. Chuck Cicigna, representing the CSD's Utility Advisory Committee. Very thorough report, Rob. I'd like to say the draft letter that the UAC has got out there was based on the first draft of this report. So tonight we'll be looking at the updated version. But we shared some of the same concerns Charlie mentioned, the chloride contamination, the sand spit water level criteria reevaluation, if we look at that well, those kind of further evaluations that we need to continue with. Some other minor comments about reference to basin plan tables that weren't included in this report. I think it was page 7, the recycled water distribution discussion, maybe the mitigation factors for each of the 6 different options for disposal could be included. But the key thing is that discussion about the need for the additional well and the flexibility that it will add to the operations, and particularly that concept of increasing sustainable yield, even though you're really using same run times. I think page 4 in that report alludes to pumping from different sections of the aquifer, or it mentions actually different aquifers, little subcompartments, and how that affects yield. I don't know if it's possible to put together a scenario that looks at how you could dial back the Palisades well, perhaps with the options of another well, and the fact that that's right on saltwater intrusion front. I don't know if we can get that specific, but there's a lot of information that maybe could be less technical. Thanks.
Thank you.
Richard Margetson, just a quick one, Rob, following up on Chuck's comment. The mitigation factors, I think, are very important to be in that report. When other agencies or boards are looking at this, and we as the public are talking about these mitigation factors, they look at us like they have no clue what we're talking about, seriously. And if the Board of Supervisors is going to approve something maybe in December, I think those numbers need to be in some reference document that we can say, okay, the mitigation factor for putting water at the cemetery, what it is for bringing it into the schools, what it is for the dryland farmers. We've had that discussion forever. The dryland farmers' mitigation factor is 0. 0. There's no benefit to any water going there.
Oh, thank you. Any additional comments?
Lindy Owen, I wanted to just comment about the letter that was drafted by the Los Osos Groundwater Committee, where in the, third, fourth paragraph down, it says additional wells will not reduce seawater intrusion. So I'd like you to clarify that whether we pump out of the back end of the basin or out of the front end of the basin, we have a limited supply unless we are blessed with some miracle. And then at the very end, that letter comments that this could lead to the completion of this is basically saying that if we put some of these extra wells inland, that this could lead to the completion of new residential developments, which have been blocked by limited water resources, and certainly an increase in local property values. I really reject that we bring in the real estate issues. There are 500 empty lots waiting to be built on, and everything that happens here in this meeting, that decision about whether we have any extra water is going to be pushed so that there can be future development. And I think that until we have enough guarantee that we are stable and we have a little bit of extra, we do not want to see any discussion about starting to build on out of these 500 empty lots. I have one other point. Again, I'll continue bringing up the private wells. We have no idea if private wells, there are new ones going in on private property outside the prohibition zone with no idea how much water they're using. Until that gets addressed, I don't know how we can ever get a grip on how much water is coming out of our basin on a daily, weekly, or annual basis. So I really urge that we consider that we need to get monitors on those wells just to see what the usage is. It's crazy to not. And the couple that have gotten permits for new wells, how much debt is that going to help our data? So maybe we've got 15 wells that are being monitored. We've got 500 wells or 485 that are not. Thanks.
Anybody else? Lindy, I had a question. You referenced something that I don't know where you referenced it. You said there was a letter from the CSD. There's no letter from the CSD.
District website.
Mr. Chair, it was comments from a community group that drafted a letter under Mr. Goodrich's.
Okay. Thank you, because I know the CSD didn't submit anything.
Correct.
Okay, so it was a letter submitted to the CSD. Okay.
It's in your packet.
Okay, no, I'm just trying to understand, because you said from the CSD. It's, okay. All right, we'll go on with public comment. Thank you.
Barry Brannon, a property owner in the valley. I'm looking at the Cleith Harris report. basically, and it's the Los Osos Valley Groundwater Basin Modification Request. And it appears to me that we have an eastward creep of the boundary. And I'd like to, I'm looking at your page 23 of the report, if you want to see it, and it shows that the eastward line is on the other side of the Cemetery Mesa. And I'd like to point you out to a report that was done by the USGS in 1988 that talks about the hydrology and water resources of the valley. And in their report, they say that there is, I can't give you the page, but I do have the detail, little or no groundwater enters the basin from the east end of the Los Osos Valley for two reasons. First, shallow slopes and thin clay soils greatly hinder the horizontal movement of water. Second, the mesa-like terrace just inside the east end of the basin creates a local groundwater mound. So my point is that you've drawn the eastern boundary outside of the basin, and that doesn't match up with the USGS report. And I think that eastern boundary needs to be reevaluated. It should not be on the east side of the Cemetery Mesa. It should be on the west side. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, we'll close it. And Rob, I think you'll have some comments and responses.
Yes, please, sir. So for Mr. Walker, who was looking for a contrast between a permanent well and a monitoring well, it's probably a factor of 10 there between those two, round numbers by the time you get all done. So whereas a monitoring well might be, in this case, because it's limited to one zone, maybe $60,000, a permanent well might be at least 10 times that.
So let me just test my understanding, sure, which I think would be a helpful frame to put this in. The action that's being considered is to test this particular location for a production well. Right. You're not going to drill it out to the full size of a production well, nor equip it as a full production well. And so I think the terminology used is called a test well.
Yeah.
And if that test well is successful as a production well, it becomes a production well. If it's not successful for that, then it could become a monitoring well.
Right. We would re-drill it as a permanent well.
Right. You wouldn't re-drill it.
New.
Could use it. So this is a step toward production. And the fallback is to use it for monitoring if it's not good for anything else.
Yeah. And just to clarify, this well is sufficiently small.
5 inches.
So just 5. We wouldn't use it for production. It would be truly as a test, and then it could default to monitoring. Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And there was some comments about adding the mitigation factors and some of that background information into the report. I think that would strengthen the report, and I totally agree with that. Lindy had brought up this, which really, of all the things that we talk about in this basin plan, the issue of whether shifting production results in additional yield is probably the most hotly contested, I think, for some who have a lot of experience in water in general. It feels counterintuitive. Although I'm not the one running the model and doing the groundwater hydrology, I can tell you that we grappled with this to some significant extent when we prepared the basin plan, had it peer reviewed by another groundwater expert. We're now seeing some physical data supporting the conclusion that recovering water levels on the west side do result in a retreat of the chloride, which ultimately results in better yield in the basin. However, I'm not going to, I think it's helpful for folks to understand what's being stated in the basin plan and to read that section in the plan that really tries to describe how the water moves. There's some very fancy flow diagrams that talk about where the water goes. And really, water is not created or destroyed. That's absolutely true. And that's where the hydrologist is not saying that water just appears here. It's where the water moves, as whether it moves out to the creek, whether it moves out to the ocean, and how that water is accounted for. That's the balance that they're trying to do in the groundwater model. So there's a section in the basin plan, I can't quote you chapter and verse right now, that highlights that. And for those who are interested in diving into the detail, I think that would be good to continue the conversation. And if there are experts on both sides, and we ever wanted to have a little workshop where our groundwater expert would love to go through extensive detail, but you need to be have plenty of time to do that discussion. I'm sure we'd be happy to do that.
It's because he's a scientist.
He is a scientist.
So let me just add a conceptual. I think where people get hung up on this is that they visualize pumping from the basin as pumping from a bathtub. And it's not that. In terms of this particular physical effect, we're pumping from a running stream. It is better the concept. And so what happens down at some far end of that flow, which is the seawater intrusion, is it does make a difference where you withdraw the water. And that's, Spencer's a geologist. It's really just a matter of physics. And I agree. Anybody wants to sit down and work through that, maybe we should have a seminar. But it is the reality of hydrogeology that's how it works. So.
Thank you, sir.
Get that.
And then to Mr. Brandon's comments about the basin boundary, I think we'll follow up on that offline and look at those. I know that old report has been, it's important to unearth that from time to time and to compare where we were to where we are.
I think also in that regard, DWR, DWR is the controlling agency there. We can't set the boundaries, and we've tried, we've given input on their boundary and the modifications, but it's the Department of Water Resources in Sacramento that makes that determination. So,
and again, I think the key issue of the county's request for basin boundary modification is to bring the boundary of the main basin back to the adjudicated area, so that this committee's work is consistent and simplified. The detailing of the far edge of the boundary is a DWR job from a long time ago, and so wherever that line is drawn is the adjudicated part of the basin. It's not, and the justification for bringing it back to the adjudicated basin was richly detailed in a report that Spencer did for us, Cleith Harris. I'm just looking at Kathy, and there's a whole technical appendix and then some that justifies exactly where we asked DWR to reset the boundary for the main basin. So,
and there's also a legal basis for that, right, based on the litigation and the jurisdiction. So, okay.
That's all I got. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. I appreciate everybody's comments and input. So we'll be discussing this again at our next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just offer my thoughts on this as we get forward. As I look at the intention of this report is to describe the metrics, the trends of the metrics, and to talk about evaluating the Program C infrastructure. And I think that the report does that. It accomplishes that, and the addition of the mitigation factors is fine, but it is describing the reality. I think the one thing that I'm curious about is the question of the chloride metric and the extent to which wellbore flow is going to affect that. And that seems to be the one thing, if we're going to start talking about a chloride metric trend, that we ought to resolve. And I guess, Rob, what's the time? How involved is getting a resolution to that? Is that a big deal, or is that something we can do fairly quickly and just not even have to mention it in this report?
Need to get back to you on that. I think that there could be some chemical signatures that we can look for, and I know Spencer has already done that. Okay. And explained that in the last annual report to some degree. Right. But let staff bring back some ideas to increase certainty there.
Okay. I think that's the one thing. I mean, we're putting it out that we're observing metric trends, and this one we have a question about, and it says a portion without saying how big a portion. We may not know. But I think if we're going to report on those trends, this seems like something we can nail down and should. I guess the other question I had in doing that is that the metric is a composite of how many wells? for the chloride metric?
I think it's 4 wells and one's double counted, or 5. I can pull that up quickly.
So I guess
if you
the
like.
question is, could we redo the trends, just getting rid of that one well, and see what that version of the metric
It
shows?
would really change it, yes. And you could see it both ways just to see it.
Yeah.
Because that one well exists in that submarine canyon, and
So it's
really,
a key.
It's a sentinel.
So we
type
have a
well.
question of a key observation point that
Yeah.
really needs to be resolved. And so, whereas I was comfortable with the vast majority of this report, I think that's the one thing that we just need to nail down,
It's a fair
and
comment.
soon, before we issue the final on this.
Good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank everybody for their comments. With that, we'll move on to item 7C, the Los Osos seawater intrusion imaging in the partnership with Cal Poly.
Say that in one breath, right?
Pardon?
It's a big thing to say in one breath. Let me just pull up the map here. Okay. Speaking of physics, at your last meeting, we had some public comment from Mr. John Jasmine-Sek, who is here, I think. John, are you still here? Yes. Oh, great. So if I say anything amiss, please do correct me. But Mr. Jasmine-Sek has an offer for the committee that he provided last time, and staff has followed up on that offer. And it is to use a technology called electrical resistivity imaging, or ERI, to map the seawater front and the basin geology and some key locations of our basin. And without going in detail as to the physics of this, the basic test procedure is you simply put in steel electrodes at intervals, about 30 feet between stakes, along a long line. And you can just do this by hand. The stakes only go in maybe a foot. And you take a reading at the same location year over year. And these readings can be interpreted by equipment that Cal Poly owns to infer the location of things like the seawater wedge as it's coming in. And so the one challenge is the longer the line, the deeper you can see. So when I first heard about it, I thought, we'll just put these things everywhere in the community. This will be great. Well, you have to lay out a line that's like a whole kilometer long. So it's not a simple deal. And so we've now done some looking at potential locations. Some of these run through areas which could have some environmental sensitivity. And it's just foot traffic, and it's a non-invasive type of procedure, but it does need that very long line to get that visibility. And here in your staff report, you will see a couple of things. One is that we propose to do this in a number of different locations. This is one, which we're calling the Broderson location, where we can get a nice deep reading, perhaps down to 800 feet, which would be down to the bottom of the basin. We'd also like to see what we're calling the community center profile, which is here, right across the street. Again, this will all be done by Cal Poly staff at no cost to the community. And they would run out this line down all the way to the Ramada Drive and to LOVR. So a long line of stakes, just be there for a day or two in every sampling event. Again, we're looking for very long linear opportunities. This doesn't work well along streets because of the interference with everything that's happening in street utilities. Best done in virgin territory. So, because that was the other thing I said, let's just lay it out on the street. And and then the third location we're calling the Monarch Grove profile, basically stretching from the trees there in Monarch Grove all the way on out along footpaths where possible. And this would be a great one because it would really map where that seawater wedge is coming in. I mean, you're basically putting your measuring tape right across the seawater in front, spanning the submarine canyon. So this was one that was of pretty significant interest to staff if we could do it. So you'll see a picture of the stake there. So not a big deal, right? It's just a long extension cord with some stakes. So what staff would like to do is, number one, Jasmine Sek is here for any questions you might have, and we'd be happy to answer those. But also, if you are interested in proceeding, to solicit some assistance. The county may be of significant assistance because we provided some of the property ownerships within these long lines, and they vary from private properties to publicly owned properties to county properties. And so we'd need to be reaching out, and the best players to do that would hopefully put their hand up and spend a little time on this. So this would be done year over year as long as the class is still meeting. And so we'd get some trending over time and can make adjustments as we go. But it's being offered at no charge, and if folks are interested, be happy to answer questions. And if you're willing to go forward, then we'll work directly with individual members of the committee who might know some of the property owners and help us with some of the environmental issues.
That was my first question, that this isn't public property, so how would you get the permission from the underlying property owner? So, I mean, I don't see that as being an easy issue to resolve, quite frankly.
Depends, of course. There was one...
I'm looking at the second alternative here, which is the one that I think is the biggest problematic one.
Two of the owners I know personally, so I might be able to help.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to give a shot with this. As you say, the county is right in the center of all this, and I'm familiar with this technique.
We'll take your volunteerism here, Bruce.
Yeah, I step in it all the time. So it's just a extension cord and a couple of stakes, but we'll see how the resource agencies feel about that.
Well, that was my second question, because I can't. I mean, with the snail and fish and wildlife, I just think I don't know how we could get them to buy off on this. We'd have to do monitoring at the time we did this, I would assume.
Well, I think it's worth.
You're volunteering for both now, Bruce?
Yeah, no. This is the classic and probably the most directly effective and detailed way of finding out where seawater is. This goes right to the heart of the physics of the situation, and it's absolutely the technique that we should be employing to image the seawater front. And so, to the extent that we can do it, I think one thing we do is, Dr. Jabsanek, we should first of all work with our hydrogeologists to be sure that the dimensions of these lines image the section that we need to image. And second, we might just talk about some alternatives as to, orientations, length of these lines, and the actual positioning of them, to be sure that before we go into a detailed effort at getting property owner approval to do this, we know we're actually setting up an experiment that has some promise. So I think that first technical, I'd be happy to get together with you and Mr. Harris. We could get a map out and just really fine-tune this to be sure that we know what we're hoping to image, and then go from there. So this is good stuff.
Very good.
Oh.
Yeah,
I've got one volunteer. Are you going to be my second here?
What am I volunteering for? What part of it? Can't do anything with the land use.
To carry the stakes out there, Mark.
Sure, we can do that. Hydrogeology, we might be able to help with that part too, if we needed. The timing of information coming back, would that be something that you mentioned doing this year after year, so is the data get more reliable doing it year after year, or would we get some good information back the first go-around?
I think first go-around, Dr. Jasmine Sek can be, of course, answer that question. I think you were looking at doing it perhaps twice a year. But feel free to come to the podium if you want to elucidate.
Yeah, so I was thinking maybe twice a year might be a reasonable imposition on the landowners. More is always better, but we would get good data every time. It's just that we would see how things are changing over time. And that's the key thing, is to see if the remediation efforts are lessening the chloride concentrations and or pushing the intrusion front backwards. And so it would be a way to give spatial information to that as opposed to the points in the wells. So that's the utility of it. As far as the dimensions, roughly a rule of thumb is about 20% of the profile length is how far deep you can look. And so the basin depth being roughly 700 feet at its deepest, maybe slightly more, we would need pretty much about a kilometer line to reliably get that deep. And so those dimensions that are quoted there are, unless you're looking for middle aquifer stuff, to look at the zone E are kind of the lengths you need. And that's why those sites were kind of picked out. But, you get what you can get, so we'll see what happens. Yeah.
And the reliability of this information is this have you done this procedure in other basins? And
I've never used it for saltwater intrusion. We use it. I have some information here you can look at on other surveys we've done. We've used it down in Los Alamos with the USGS, looking at their groundwater model for what's it called? Santa Rosa Creek, I think, groundwater basin down there. And so we were imaging more the geologic structure for them. So we imaged the fold structure down there, looked for faults, things like that to inform their groundwater modeling. Saltwater intrusion is the easiest target possible because chlorides make the electrical resistivity go down to like 0.1, whereas fresh water is 1s, 10s, things like that. So it's a very easy target. I have a paper here that was done, and you guys can have it. A few years ago up in Monterey Bay, they've had big saltwater intrusion problems, Watsonville, from the agricultural pumping and things like that. It's a much larger scale location, but they employed the same methods across all of Monterey Bay, and you can see the results of that in their this paper here that they published on that. And so this data set that we collect would be the same principle, just smaller scale. But saltwater is an easy target. Yeah. And so that's why we think we could add a lot of good data to this. And it would just be collected year over year and archived, free to you guys, free to anyone else that wants it. We would just keep updating our report about what it looks like, and then you guys can do the same, interpret it, and talk with others if you want about it. So for us, we got this new equipment. We have a lot of students that are interested in geohydrology. It's local. So it's effectively zero cost for us as well to drive out here and do it, and it's fun.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll have public comment on this item. Anybody? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back. Thank you. So
I've given you this before, but just give my office a call.
this is in our staff.
Thanks,
John. This is perfect.
That's the staff report.
That's not
here.
Yeah. Okay, I know Bruce has to leave in 15 minutes here. Okay, so thank you. What do we want to do on this item? I know Bruce is going to meet with him. Do you want to just defer?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. This is a great thing. And I don't know how I could help, but if...
Okay.
Now we'll
All right, well, Bruce...
we call on your personal contacts to be sure we can pave the way for this. But
Okay, so I think that we're in agreement then to proceed forward with Bruce contacting them and sitting down and talking about it and then bringing it back to us.
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
No, that sounds great.
All right, great, thank you. So last item is the discussion of the 2019 priorities and budgets, and budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So often we do our annual budgeting in December or even January, but this year it appeared to me that there was probably a discussion that needed to be had earlier so staff can prepare for next year's budget cycle a little bit more proactively. And if you look back at what's been accomplished since December of 2015, many of the items that were contemplated in the Basin Plan and specifically in the court action and the judgment have been accomplished, and I listed those out in the staff report. The consistent monitoring and reporting, the annual reports to the court, the Basin Infrastructure Plan substantially completed, positive impact on chlorides, adaptive management where appropriate, water conservation discussions and workshops. So, we made progress in a lot of these areas, and we've picked a lot of the fruit that perhaps some of it was low-lying, and the next steps on some of these further programs are more challenging, more expensive, and that's why staff felt it was important to just get a list in front of you so you could begin thinking about it, provide preliminary input today, provide staff-to-staff input based on your own budget cycles so that we come back in January and talk about budgets, we'll be prepared. So I provided 7 items which were food for thought, and maybe I can get those up on the screen here. If you'll bear with me a moment.
You might want to start with number 7.
Oh, yes. Yeah. You guys saw that, did you? Did you see that? Okay.
Rob and I spoke about that one.
Yeah. So we'll save that one for last.
Okay.
But
I was just kidding.
But the first item is already in your budget cycle. That's the Cuesta by the Sea monitoring well. Again, we'd like to keep that on the docket for 2019 as we get that minor use permit approved by the county. One of the items that we've had in our budget, but perhaps at a slightly lower funding level, was the creek discharge feasibility and permitting. Now that's a $600,000 task if we were just to bite it all off at once. But staff's proposing that you take a stepwise approach to this, knowing that as you establish feasibility with each step, it becomes easier to pursue funding through third parties. You get more clarity as to next steps or possible ways to save dollars on those next steps. And so we're proposing that you would do $50,000 worth of work in 2019 to accomplish some of the baseline sampling that you've already started in a limited basis, and then to look at some of that soil aquifer treatment to remove carbon. And that was one of the tasks in our work program for creek discharge, and we could begin that task, as well as get a little more focused on grantsmanship on that particular item. And we've reached out to the consultant that worked with us on that, and they're indicating that maybe a $5,000 budget within that $50,000 would help us focus our grant pursuit efforts quarterly, as programs are always changing with respect to the water bond money available. So that's a first cut at this, and be happy as the committee reviews this to look at changing that number up or down. Also, you saw a presentation from us with respect to stormwater and perched water recovery that was of interest to the committee. And that's both the project at 8th and El Moro that I talked about at the last meeting, but also other stormwater recovery opportunities. You've heard about Warden Creek. You've heard about other stormwater outfalls that go to the bay. And so this would be seed money to begin to more formally investigate those and put construction numbers on them, look for grant opportunities, further opportunities, and maybe do some physical testing of that water that's currently being discharged to the bay with every rain event. So that would be seed money for that effort. And as we fund these, some of our partner entities like the Morro Bay National Estuary Program may also be able to assist within the context of their mini grants or other sampling programs. Some field survey, this is one we do feel pretty strongly about. We've actually gotten some consultant proposals for this to survey 17 of the wells that we have ready access to, just to make sure they're on the appropriate datum and that we've nailed those exact absolute elevations down in the well casing. It's a very inexpensive item, and we can add to that some of those sand spit items, and we've got a couple of consultants interested in that work. Water conservation, we'd like to continue to have some funding for that, and it's been very difficult to get folks, even with our enhanced rebates, to bite, and we'd like to continue the discussion on Title 19 as those programs go forward, because in that context, the plumber actually contacts the property owner, says, would you like a new fixture? I'll come and put it in. It's less customer involvement required, and so we'd like to have some seed funding for that. You also may be able to provide some seed funding for septic tank conversion next year. Even if we only did a limited number, we could start a priority, a ranking list, and provide some funding for that, and we're suggesting $10,000 for those discussions and pilot programs. One non-budgeted item would be the Los Osos Community Plan Review, and that is, I understand, and Bruce can give an update, but is coming next year. The draft plan would be released and discussed first at Planning Commission level at the county, and so as we see those plans hit the street, bring those forward and see if there's Basin Management Committee input that should be given to those drafts, as well as just track the process. And then the seventh one, on a personal note, was to recruit a permanent executive director to replace me. And that role has been 3 years and been incredibly rewarding for me, and I've enjoyed every minute. My desire is to transition from paid consultant to unpaid volunteer, sitting in the audience and participating on committees, ad hoc and standing. So that is my long-term vision for my Los Osos career, and I'd like to accomplish that by January of 2020.
So we'll be redefining interim to mean 4 years then.
There you go.
No, and we appreciate all of the work that you've given us, and we did envision this as an interim position. So
that concludes my report. Thank you.
Do you have any questions? So, anybody have public comment on this particular item? Yeah, Lindy.
Lindy Owen, I just wanted to say I think Rob's done a great job, and if we get one more year out of him, that would be wonderful. I wanted to also, the enhanced rebates issue is for conservation. As far as I know, there's zero information available to the community, and I don't know how you get it out, whether the postcard forgot to get mailed, but people currently, if we do have some funding, the $10,000 is proposed for next year, and is there money left from this year? I'd just be curious how we can alert the community to get involved with asking for some of these conservation rebates and assistance. And then the septic tank conversions, I'm curious, it's almost a little late because people have either given up. I don't know too many people that actually caught rainwater into their tanks, and do you have an idea how many tanks exist in Los Osos that are waiting for conversion? And just curious what kind of monies what will the conversion look like? Is that the pump to get the water out, or does it include the downspouts to get the water in? Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment. Rob, you want to respond, please?
Yes. Certainly, we did send out a postcard, invited everybody to a conservation workshop, which was well attended, and had a flyer that we sent to folks that talk about the different programs. We probably need to do that again and continue to invest in that in some regular cycle, perhaps messaging on the message board and so forth. So would be open to those ideas. That's not my personal strength. And as far as the pilot program for the septic tank conversion, I still think there's hundreds of septic tanks that were cleaned and closed but never converted. So yes, it's late because no funding has been available for that. But if the committee is interested in making some funding available, this would be an opportunity to do that as part of this budget cycle. So it's just a staff idea, not married to it. Be happy to get feedback.
Thank you. We have any comments on this? I think it's a good budget except for item number 7.
Yeah.
Agreed,
Yeah.
but, we'll have to deal, I guess. Just for reference, there is a draft of the Los Osos community plan out for review right now. It's been there for a while. There's an EIR that's coming. We do hope to get it in front of our planning commission in the first part of next year, which I hope is toward the end of the first quarter, but we'll see how that goes. We hope to get it to the Coastal Commission by the end of the year, and we'll be working. One of the key elements of dealing with this is going to be to get the Coastal Commission staff up on our water management activities, and so I'm starting that fairly soon. Other than that, I agree that looks like a good program, and look forward to seeing how we actually make it happen.
Now, Mr. Chair, just to confirm, these are the additional work items that aren't necessarily normally associated with our budget. There's still the annual report. Right. That's not listed here because I know we have to do that. We have to administer our meetings.
Yeah. Regarding the creek discharge, so my takeaway from our previous effort is that there was we weren't in a good position for grant funding, and so with this $50,000 budget, I think you touched on it, that would put us in a better position for some grant funding for this project. And if not, what is our next step? Because what my takeaway was that it was a large budget, a large cost to get to where we needed to be, and so this is just an incremental step of where we have to go. What are we going to do with this information when it's done? And I think you mentioned about a consultant, that $5,000 of this would go towards the consultant helping us with this?
Yeah, and I certainly will bring all those details back. Okay. But in essence, you have a $600,000 mountain to climb, and some of the initial tasks, which were more low-lying, were the baseline monitoring. You already attracted some additional funding for that, so there's other groups that do monitoring, and so our hope is as we step out and do some, we can encourage potential partners. So that was the thought there. And then the soil aquifer treatment was one of the initial tasks to look at how that column of sand in the creek bottom could help remove the carbon that's so important to the state to allow this water to be harvested downstream or allowed to replenish the basin. So those were the tasks we were thinking of taking on. The $5,000 would be a subset of that, to have a consultant do a formal grant search quarterly and to reach out to partner entities and do a brief write-up memo to your committee. So we're formalizing our grant search a little better than we have.
Okay, good. And then just looking at the flow from the wastewater project, has that changed since we've looked at it before? Is that quantity of water that we once thought available still available for a creek discharge?
So in our last meeting, we talked about that 500,000 gallon a day flow. And staff's perspective is that, number one, I think augmenting that flow should be a committee priority, and that's why we put some seed money in for stormwater recovery. Many communities in California are jumping on that that process and getting grant funding for it. So I think there's a large quantity of water that's being released to the bay that we can perhaps recover, and that could be eligible for creek discharge over time. Also, knowing that some of the dynamics of the Broderson site, while it appears to be working just fine, there are certainly unknowns there, and having multiple options over time if something unforeseen occurs, I think is very prudent, since you really have one 40-acre-foot storage reservoir, and you have Broderson and then some of the reuse sites. So it's just an idea of advancing what we know is a promising water management option to the point where it could be in our bag of options.
Sure, that sounds good. Just one last comment on the conservation. Lindsay mentioned the communication. Just Golden State's website has a lot of information on there. A lot of rebate programs are in place currently right now. So how we get that message out there, I think, is still important through the BMC. But also just knowing that there are programs out there today for some programs, in addition to what the county has out there.
All right, and we have the same thing on the CSD website too,
Right.
so it's just a matter of getting that out to the public.
Right.
Okay, Bruce, I understand you have to leave.
Thanks,
so.
Bruce. Appreciate it.
Okay, so with that then...
I have a
I'm
question
sorry.
I can ask later, but so this 200,000 additional above the normal budget, I think, is what this discussion is about. And all of our entities have budgeted for 2019 by now. I'm curious if S&T Mutual Water Company has budgeted enough. I like all these additions here, but are we looking at $200,000 additional now in this budget?
No, if you look at last year, we were carrying the 110. In fact, I have that. If you just give me a second, I'll grab the financial staff report. Let's see here.
And we can do this offline too.
I think it is important. So if you looked at last year's budget, it was $300,000, including contingencies, and that included $115 for the Quest by the Sea monitoring wells. That's a carry forward. About $60,000 to do your annual report, $50,000 to do your administration. So, and there was a pretty healthy contingency on that of about $30,000. So, a lot of that budget would be absorbed into these items. They're just more focused. Maybe it's a 20% increase from last year. So not significant. So would be 4% of that.
Yep. That's not going to be a problem.
Okay, all right, so we'll go to public comment for items not on the agenda. Okay, seeing none. Oops, sorry.
Lindy Owen again. I wanted to see if, I'm still curious, we have an upper aquifer that is very expanded from what it was originally, and we have the lower. So the idea that we're nitrate treating and doing some blending gives us a huge access to water that we don't really talk about very much. But I wonder if you can just kind of bring that into the perspective of, are we going to do more of that? And is blending working well? Is the cost of denitrifying making our water something that we can actually consider expanding? And how does that affect the overall issue? Because that's the only other outside source of water that I can think of. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment for items not on the agenda? Okay, Rob, we'll close public comment. Do you want to respond?
I just think it's an astute comment that it's true. Program B was enhancing and expanding that use of that upper aquifer water, and we've talked about the cost. It's working right now, and Golden State's doing a great job. The district has some denitrifying facilities as well, but it can be expanded. We chose not to do that because of it's expensive to do the operations and the brine management. But certainly it's always an available resource that we have not fully utilized.
Mm-hmm.
So I think then, so our next meeting, we will not be having a December meeting?
Probably not. Probably January.
So our next meeting will be the January meeting. So we'll adjourn till then. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Everybody have a good holidays.
You too.